Can a psychopath fire witch obtain her freedom? Kiara by the Azrian portal. Once again, Kiara sat on the end of her rustic four-poster bed, its frame draped with luxurious cloths of dazzlingly white silk. The bed itself lay messy, the pillows heaved over each other in a crumpled mess. The duvet was slung off the foot of the bed, dangling over its edge and resting on the polished hardwood floor beneath. She didn't know how many times she'd sat there, clothes falling limply around her slender form, as she tenderly kissed her latest lover goodbye before watching them leave, cursing them and counting their money the second they were out of sight. Her bright smile quickly turning to a curled and crooked lip. Kiara often wondered who she hated more, the men or herself. But it was always the same conclusion. It was always them. Sighing, she looked to distract her mind. Gazing down at the palm of her hand, Kiara slowly wriggled her fingers, taking in a deep breath. Something started to spark between them, as if the flow of air between her fingers was creating some sort of unseen friction. The sparks grew bigger, until a flame emerged, a slither of fire that Kiara absent-mindedly twirled between her knuckles. There was a knock at the door. In a lurch of panic, Kiara quickly clenched her fist, extinguishing the flame. The knock came from Verva, the owner of the establishment in which Kiara worked. She never waited for an answer, and a moment later, her head was around the door, smiling pleasantly. What did she want? Good work this morning, my girl. It's quiet downstairs now, the parade is starting. Why don't you go down and see if you can drum up some business for later? Kiara said nothing, she just nodded. Verva had learnt to accept no more than this and skulked out, closing the door behind her. Kiara took another soothing breath, lifting her nose to the ceiling. She tried to quell her inner anguish. If there was one thing she hated more than letting men do what they did, it was going into town to convince them to do it. Heaving herself up, her body clearly rejecting her mind's purpose, not wanting to leave the solitude of her room, she headed for the door. Kiara emerged from what she not so fondly referred to as her carefully disguised prison, into a lurid courtyard of red stone walls covered in climbing flowers that wove their way amongst the wooden slatted windows and two-story terraces that sprawled across this affluent corner of the city. The sun-soaked shrine in the center, a bronze statue of some old dead hero, shimmered in the light. Kiara sneered as she passed the metallic monstrosity. Every time she saw it there, she wondered why nobody else seemed to spot the vulgarity beneath. A hero of the people, standing guard outside a house of pleasure, corruption, and despair. Against the wall of the brothel, Kiara spotted a fellow worker, head between her knees, weeping. Some girls couldn't handle the life they were forced into. Kiara didn't pause to comfort her. She wasn't interested in more tedium than she was already subjected to today. The heat of the high noon sun pummeled the sandstone paving along which Kiara wandered, bringing beads of sweat to her forehead. Why they called this city Coldmore, she'd never know. 8 years she'd lived here, and it was never cold. She'd always thought to ask about the name, but dreaded the idea of an answer longer than a sentence or two. People liked to talk too much. This district of the city rose high, with more two-story red stone houses. Narrow and constantly splitting off in new directions, the streets were like a maze. You could easily get lost here, easily lose an afternoon, but Kiara didn't care. It was quiet here. Just how she liked it. A moment's peace. Time without a man in her ear. It was remarkable, Kiara mused to herself as she made her way further down the streets towards a growing sound of cheers and screams somewhere beyond the maze of houses, that despite being told hour after hour how beautiful she was, she felt anything but. Not that their opinions would mean much to her under a different circumstance anyway. Kiara had little interest in what most people had to say. The noise of the crowd grew louder as she took a right down another, near identical street. The shutters of the houses were all thrown open in the warmth of summer. Beautiful potted flowers were placed precariously on window ledges, items of clothing hanging out to dry overhead. There was little fear of crime here, not in this part of the city. The few people she passed were the epitome of wealth. Wearing colorful clothes, neat and well looked after, adorned with jewels that sparkled in the sunlight. Kiara often had to remind herself that this is what she, herself, looked like. As she passed a couple, arm in arm, she got exactly what she'd come to expect from the people here. A reserved smile, a nod, and a swift look past her. She didn't much care for the people here. Although truth be told, she didn't much care for people anywhere. Finally, she reached the parade. The noise of the crowd was nearly deafening. Loud, unseen drummers played in rhythm to screeches and cheers of hundreds of onlookers. Ducking around a corner, behind the crowds, Kiara took yet another breath, pulled on a fake smile and streaked out into the herded masses. Immediately she spotted a former patron, a portly man with a ragged beard, stained clothes, and deep pockets. He didn't much care to look after himself, he let others do that for him. Kiara was on him in moments, draping her fingers softly over his left shoulder before curling around his waist. "We've missed you, Clark." Clark couldn't have looked more pleased to see her. He ran his hands down her arm, looking at her from head to toe. "It has been," Clark grumbled with grim, pleasureful sound, "a while. Come and visit me soon." Kiara winked, getting closer. She pressed her body against his, arms around his waist, resting her chin on his chest and looking up at him with big, dazzling eyes. "Please." Clark grinned, food caught between his yellow and black teeth, nodding furiously. "Good." Kiara slunk off his form and turned away. The second her eyes no longer met his, they dropped from dazzling to dull. Kiara continued to slide across the back of the crowds that lined a wide and open high street. She could hear the clinking of metal and the marching of steel-booted soldiers as they made their way through the gathered spectators. Thanks to her short stature, though, she couldn't hope to see over the much taller men, women, and even large children all clamoring to get a look. But she wasn't after a look anyway. She found the annual parade to be rather harrowing. People once free, sworn into lifelong servitude of a god they'd never seen, wheeled up and down in front of the people like cattle at a market. She might spend her day in the service of others, but at least she could enjoy some of life's more solitary treasures when her work was done, like walking down a busy street without being gawked at. She carried on, eyeing the crowd for stray men. Men she knew, men she liked the look of, or just men that had wandered too far from their wives. But her eye was caught by none of these. Instead, it was caught by a city guard leaning up against the wall of a house that cornered yet another winding alley. The city guard was short and slim, with rough blonde hair, soft features, and clad in exotic metal platework. He watched the crowd keenly. "Should you not be in the parade?" Kiara called out as she approached him, grabbing his attention. "Somebody's got to keep an eye out for the unpleasant sort." The city guard gave Kiara a look up and down, but not like Clark. This was a look of disdain. Of disapproval. "Lucky we don't get many of those around here," Kiara said, smiling innocently and taking up a leaning stance beside him. "Warm today, isn't it?" The guard mumbled back agreeingly, clearly not looking to strike up any sort of conversation. "Must be hot in that armor," Kiara continued. She leaned in close, took the guard by the arm and whispered silkily in his ear. "Maybe you should let me take it off and cool you down." The guard snapped a look at her. They were nose to nose. A fiendish smile on her face, a bitter look on his. He gave her a cold, penetrating stare before pushing her away forcefully. She shook her head with a fluttering laugh, a smile still spread across her face, a contrast to the anger she felt inside. How dare he? Kiara had gotten very, very good at hiding her true emotions. She wouldn't get much business if she couldn't. But she always struggled to maintain her mask when they knocked her around.